Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jose. I'm the Access Academy officer in Project Access, and I'm studying history in LSE. I'm in my second year, and I'll be your host in this webinar today. And the webinar is part of the Access Academy webinars. And yeah, the webinar is going to be on the TSA exam to study a few subjects in Oxford and Cambridge. But we're going to focus mainly in PPE today. Project Access is an international nonprofit set up to provide bright students from non-traditional backgrounds with personal mentors who are currently in, university students at one of our target universities. So this webinar today is really relevant to everyone who wants to enter Oxford or Cambridge for PPE, for example. And yeah, so that's why we have our panelists today, Jana and Peter. Thank you so much for being with us today. And yeah, if you want to just introduce yourselves, that'd be amazing. Thank you.
Sure. Shall I go first? Do you want to go, Peter?
Feel free to go first.
All right. I'm Jan. I'm from Germany. Currently I just completed the first year of my master's at Oxford. I did PPE in undergrad. I actually applied twice to Oxford in undergrad. I was rejected the first time. So I have double the TSA experience, and I hope I can contribute a bit.
Great. I'm Peter. I'm from London, and I just finished my undergrad also in PPE at Oxford at St Hilda's College. And yeah, happy to be here and hopefully contribute some tips and some things that that I think about, like looking back on how to optimize your TSA performance.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So we're going to start by just asking a question. So it's how to prepare to the TSA. So what do you need, and when should you start preparing for the exam?
Okay, so I mean, I'm happy to start with this. And I think what might be most useful is to start by saying what the TSA isn't. The TSA isn't like an A-level or a similar exam like an IB or your Abitur in Germany or whatever. It's not really a test of knowledge that you know, nor is there a lot of like very specific and counterintuitive exam technique that you need to learn. There is a syllabus, which is worth checking out online just to check you know everything, but really mainly it's just basic maths. What they're trying to do is test your ability to think and your ability to think in certain analytical ways under time pressure. So that said, you can still prepare for it, even though you can't really study for it. Well, why is that the case? It's because you're doing an exam under time conditions. And so there are things you can do to make it more likely you'll do better. For example, practicing past papers. Different people I've spoken to did this in very different ways. I definitely recommend doing at least some under fully timed conditions. Some people like to go to one extreme and just go very slowly and see what errors they made because they really didn't understand versus the errors that came from time pressure. Other people I know gave themselves even less time than the normal exam. And this was a kind of like the equivalent of altitude training, where someone's training for an athletic event and they train at a high altitude so that when they go down to a lower altitude, it's easier to do. But I think another key thing is, if you're watching this, you're probably really starting early with preparation, but you can do very well with very little preparation, because the idea is for it to act as a test of your thinking ability. So really, it's just a thing of getting into the flow of the exam, practicing it, ironing out any weak spots, that it's not something where you should be spending sort of months cramming loads of facts into your memory. It just won't help.
Yeah, Peter has been really thorough in his tips there. So just to highlight again, the TSA is essentially designed to be completed without pre-existing knowledge. Previously, in the 2000s, there actually have been tests with subject knowledge, and Oxford wanted to get rid of that. So you really don't have to know anything in particular for most of the questions. In other, some entrance exams do require you to know things, but the TSA is not one of those exams. I personally found past papers incredibly useful for practicing the TSA. as Peter said, whatever style you prefer, but I think you should at least do 2 or 3 under exam conditions. So not altitude training, but also not doing one, then checking 5 minutes whether you got the right answer, and then go on to the next question and do it like that, but actually under timed exam conditions like you would do on the day of the exam. Maybe you can even access a room you usually don't work in. So I found this really, really useful, not only because you get a hang of how the questions work, but you actually get familiar with the layout. So you're more at ease when you actually sit the exam, which was a problem for me. And the third thing I want to add is you should practice consciously. So after you finish an exam, I would recommend that you go back, like, what did I not get, and look at how you might have gotten it. I think that way you can actually maximize the value of your mock exams.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just to add 2 things on looking back over your work. The first thing is there are books you can find on the internet, and most of them about the TSA are, some people might say that they're a bit of a waste of money. I couldn't possibly comment, but the ones that are the ones that are worked solutions are often very good. So if you're going to spend any money on anything, and you don't have to, those might be a place to start. And I know at least one person who got the Kindle version of this book, used it to check all their solutions, then returned it. So even if you don't have any money, fine. Another thing you can do is that there's a specimen test that has all the answers with work solutions. So usually they have a mark scheme in the past papers, but they don't explain why the answers are what they are. But the specimen is special, so definitely check that out. The second thing is, don't just check the things that you got wrong, because it's a multi-choice test, which means you could get stuff right, but for the wrong reason. So if you can, look through everything, and if you can compare to some work solution, or do it with a friend and compare to how they got to the answer, you might learn something new that way as well. Of course, it's more likely you took the wrong approach for a question that you got wrong, so you should probably start there, but you don't need to end there.
Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, that was great. I mean, now the question I'm going to ask is a bit similar, but maybe you have some other thoughts. So what should you expect on the day of the TSA? Also, how do you nail the TSA? Can you recall maybe some questions or something similar that you might find in the exam? What are the kind of questions that you might find?
So I think start off with the past papers for sure. Yeah, I'll jump in here. They're not going to give you something, I think, that's radically different to what they've given before. The questions cover, so there are 2 sections to the TSA. The first is an hour and a half, and it's problem solving and critical thinking. There are, if I remember correctly, 50 questions in total, or some number. Half of them are problem solving, half critical thinking. They're interspersed together. What do those things mean? Well, problem solving is basically using sort of deductive problem solving skills to find the answer to some problem. Might involve basic maths, might involve a sort of a map or graph or something like that. And then critical thinking is around understanding arguments, how they work or how they don't. So you might get given some argument that's quite a long paragraph, given how little time you have. So it might be like 5-6 lines, and they'll ask what's to conclude this argument, or which of the following arguments most closely parallels that argument's reasoning, that kind of thing. So that's part 1. Part 2 is shorter, it's half an hour. You don't have to do it for every course, but for PPE you do. And it's an essay task. So you might think, how am I going to write an essay in half an hour? I'd recommend practicing it, but unofficial advice, from my understanding, it doesn't tend to matter that much. As in, I know people who've done quite poorly in it, and it didn't seem to matter. I found out I'd got in the top 10 of it, didn't come up at interview, no one ever mentioned it again. So I think you should be worried about it in that section. Whereas the first section, it's not the only thing that's used for selection, but if you've got good GCSEs, good A-level predictions, good teacher reference, and so does everyone else, it'd be your limiting factor. And that's probably where to put a bit more effort on.
Yeah. Also adding on to that, so presumably Project Access also attracts many foreign non-British students. Many tutors don't really know what kind of school that is, what kind of culture that country has. So they cannot put much value on your marks because they don't have anything to compare it to, really. So in that sense, the TSA is the only purely objective way that they can benchmark you with your fellow applicants. So I do take TSA preparation seriously, and especially the Part A.
Yeah, but that said, I think it's worth remembering that, like, this is one of those things. It's worth taking an extra time to prepare because you'll probably increase your chances of success by a little. But it's also not worth panicking if you're watching a recording of this in like October. TSA is in a couple of weeks. Probably once you've done 2 past papers, if you're having to choose between getting sleep or doing more past papers, you should get the sleep. Like, at that level, it's like there are all these things that you need to learn and spit out. It's pretty important. So if you can make some small improvements, then that's worth doing. The first past paper or 2, I would say, is basically non-negotiable. You can succeed without it, but would you fly a plane without having flown on the simulation? Would you do all sorts of things without practicing when you care about the outcome? No, because practice is cheap and it's literally like an hour. So at the start, it's worth it. Afterwards, sure, do it, but don't panic about doing it, because really you're just trying to push yourself a little bit and move the needle a little bit. At least that's how I usually thought about it.
Yeah, I think the main issue with TSA is less practicing the questions and trying to game the exam. That doesn't really work. But more getting yourself in a good mood and take it easy on your like as Peter said, like sleep for me is non-negotiable no matter what happens. Also at uni, I don't do all-nighters by principle. So definitely prioritize your well-being and your mental health first before going on and do practice. And then if you are nervous, then those additional exams are very helpful also to put you, as I said previously, to put you at ease really for the exam. It's more about that, in my opinion, than really trying to predict questions and predict answers based on question texts.
Yeah, and just to add a tiny other thing, well, 2 tiny other things, because I think there's a fair bit to say here. Firstly, in terms of exam technique, it's useful to get into the habit of skipping questions if you need to. You might be used to exams where quite often you feel like there's just loads of time. Like, you could sit there for 15 minutes not doing anything and you might not struggle that much to finish the exam on time. The TSA is not that exam. And that means that if you find this problem really interesting and don't know how to solve it, you need to have the discipline to move on and put something. You have to guess an answer for everything if you're optimizing, because there's no negative marking. So you either get 0 from guessing or 1 if you're right. But you definitely get 0 if you don't guess. But then move on, mark it somewhere so that you know to come back to it if you have time. This kind of technique seems really obvious, but it can be easy to miss if you're sort of doing exam, especially if you haven't done much practice. And there's another thing I wanted to add. Let's see, what was it? Yeah, you might find that certain types of question when you're doing your practice trip you up more, and that's useful information because you can practice more of that type of question. You can see if there are any patterns that have come up in the past before, like maybe there's an approach you can use that works for quite a lot of questions. And you can also prioritize as a result. So maybe you know that, like, you find the critical thinking questions a bit easier than the problem solving questions. So you spend a bit less time per question on critical thinking, a bit longer for problem solving, or vice versa. That kind of thing can be useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the negative marking, since there is no negative marking, it also means it's useful to be able to exclude any answer. So in the end, if you have time and no other questions to look at, or this is the question you think you have the best shot, it doesn't matter if you don't find the exact right answer. You have a 50-50 chance of getting it correct if you can rule out all but 2 of the answers.
Right.
That's really useful. Sometimes you're able to ballpark the correct estimate. So if there are magnitudes removed, for example, you say, okay, like the answer can't be 1,000,000. It's definitely going to be in the ones to hundreds. That's already really useful information if you can find that out.
And this is a useful life skill anyway, right? If you want to just if you look at an argument and you immediately notice it seems wrong, or you look at some math problem, just like multiplying 3 numbers, and you know roughly what kind of number you're going to get. These are things that are just quite helpful every day. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, which might be useful for you who are non-native speakers of English, as I am. As far as I know, the critical thinking, which is the more verbal part of the TSA, takes into account, or later when the tutors evaluate you, they kind of take into account usually that you're not a native speaker, need a bit more time with the text. Although there's no guarantee for that or something like that.
I hadn't heard of that, but it's quite possible they do.
Yeah.
Perfect, guys. Thank you so much. I think that was really useful. I also have this question, like, what happens if you're successful in the TSA? What should you expect after that, you know? What comes after the TSA? Should you expect any news from Oxford or anything? So yeah, go ahead, please.
Right, so maybe it's useful at this point to give a quick overview of the application process for Oxford courses that use the TSA. I think there's maybe one or two courses still at Cambridge that use the first part of the TSA as well. But we'll talk about Oxford for now. It's fairly similar. So you apply by October the 15th, as it usually is, which is before the normal UK UCAS deadline, which is in January. So you need to apply on time. And then your centre registers you for the test. And that centre is usually your school. But if your school can't do that, you need to try to find somewhere that will let you take the test. It's the centre rather than you as a person that registers with Oxford to be able to take the test.
Can I quickly jump into there for other countries other than UK? Usually schools don't offer it because they don't have enough pupils who actually take it. But there's a handy tool on the TSA website, I think, that lets you find the center closest to you. And also there's no guarantee that the deadline for the center registration is the 15th of October. It might be, I haven't seen it yet, but it is possible that the deadline is earlier. So better look at when you have to register sooner rather than later.
Great tip. And let's see, so you fill out, you get registered, and you then take the TSA. You've already submitted earlier your personal statement, any grades that you've already achieved, any predicted grades from your teachers, and your teachers write you a reference. That all goes to Oxford. Test goes to, usually a couple of weeks later, a few weeks later, you'll hear back. And the next stage would be an interview or a pre-interview rejection. And I know lots of people who got pre-interview rejections, and it's quite difficult, but you have to remember that, especially for courses like PPE, 8, 9 applicants per place. Now, you might be looking at that if you're also applying to American universities and thinking, oh, that's not actually that competitive compared to, say, Harvard or Yale. But there are a few things to keep in mind here. It's kind of different. Firstly, you can't apply to both Oxford and Cambridge for undergrad unless you want to be an organ scholar, I think, which probably doesn't apply to you. And that means that effectively, if you think most people who apply to one would also apply to a course at the other, your competition rate looks double as easy as it actually is. And secondly, I think a lot of the people who do apply are quite competent. Not to say that's not the case for Harvard, but I think in America there's more of a culture of sort of long shot applications, whereas actually, very sadly, in a lot of UK schools, people will be discouraged from applying to Oxbridge even if they're quite good by their teachers, and that's a problem. But what it does is it makes it look like, you know, it's only 8 or 9 per place. But still, Oxford tends to interview 3 per place on average, and that means that you're going to get lots of very good people, especially people who were just on the borderline of being invited to interview who weren't. And there are people who miss it one year, decide they're going to apply again and get in. It happens and it's fine. They often do very well. So you either get you get turned down, or you get invited to interview. If you get invited to interview, it might be at the college you applied for if you chose a college, or it might be at some other college. Then at interview, you might be interviewed by multiple colleges, or you might not. It's tricky to figure out what this means. For some subjects, you automatically get multiple college interviews. That wasn't the case for PPE when I applied. And then you will finally get an outcome, usually around January time, which will be conditional on your A-level or equivalent results, unless you've already got those results. So what does the TSA do in that whole process? The TSA is one part of the assessment of who gets to go to interview, and it can be used as well when they're deciding after interview. And different tutors may use it in a slightly different way. As far as I know, there's not one standardized process everywhere, for PPE at least. But the upshot is the TSA is one part of a big picture, but because you get so many good applicants, it's probably a part you'd like to do as well on as you can.
Adding a disclaimer to it for somebody who watches the videos a few years in advance, a few years after we record this, being hopeful here. I have heard rumors that they're trying to centralize the PPE process a little bit more. So this might not apply by the time you apply. It definitely applies in 2021.
Okay, good. Yeah, good to keep it up to date.
Yeah, great, guys.
Missed anything there? I might have done.
No, that was yeah. You shouldn't be well. It is sad if you get rejected either after your test or after your interviews. It is very annoying, but so there are great other universities as well, and you might actually prefer them more. I know a few people who switched out from Oxford and really enjoyed the experience at the other university. But also, like, don't try to tell anything during the admissions process, how the tutor addresses you, whether they interact with you much or not, whether they send you to interviews at another college. Like, you can't really tell anything from that.
Yeah, I would agree with this. And also, as a sort of a side point, not so much about the TSA, but about the whole process, the interview is like a mock tutorial. So a tutorial is a meeting where you have 1, 2, 3 people and a tutor who's an academic to discuss your work and the subject. So it might be the case that you were very bright and very capable, but you wouldn't be a good fit for that specific, quite unusual teaching system. And so there certainly have been cases of people who have excellent potential in their subject and who displayed that excellent potential at interview, but didn't get a place. I think it's quite common for people to assume that if they didn't get a place, they weren't smart enough or something. And I just think that's very often not true. So as a separate point, you're going into a competitive process, aim for success, but prime yourself for the real possibility that there are other factors that can determine what happens. And you might find afterwards that you're really grateful to have gone somewhere else.
Linking interviews and TSA, actually, we briefly mentioned the essay part earlier, which does not count as much probably as the part A. But what I found it really useful is providing interview topics you can speak about, because quite often they're very similar in style to the questions you will be, or you can be asked in your interview. So if you think about some of the other questions as well, some of the other essay questions, that actually is good a preparation for the interview as well.
Yeah, see how that would work. And I think also if you do things that might help you do better in the essay section, like trying to write a practice essay under time conditions, or trying to read an article in a newspaper and come up with the strongest opposing argument. So if you look at like an opinion piece in a newspaper and do that, or maybe you get the chance to do a competitive debating competition or something. All these activities. Also, there's a channel on YouTube called Wi-Fi, Y-W-I-P-H-I, Wireless Philosophy, that has some videos on critical thinking. All these kind of things that might help you with the essay are also going to help you at interview probably, and with your further studies, wherever they are. So it's probably not time wasted, even though the essay isn't that important, at least in my understanding. That's, again, unofficial. None of this is official university advice. If you want official university advice, go to the uni website and the TSA test page, and there's some material there about what they do.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. As we moved on a little bit to like how life in uni is, let's talk about quickly. Maybe talk about a little bit about your experience with PPE in Oxford. What can you expect about studying in Oxford? How is it studying in Oxford? You know.
I loved Oxford. I still do, even though I'm not there in person. The tutorial style really suited me. So Oxford has this thing where 2 or 3 students are in a group and go to the tutor to discuss essays and questions, and that really suited me. These are small groups because I got to ask my own questions. I think PPE, especially the philosophy and politics part, are very, very useful and fitting for this style of teaching. Economics usually is taught in bigger groups for the most part, so you don't have that much of an advantage there. It's also, you have the collegiate system. Every student is studying in their own, every student is affiliated with a college, and undergrad, a lot of teaching. It's focused college. My current college, university college, is my background. But essentially that's where I made a lot of my friends as well. It makes it easy to get access access to other people, and the college provides you with support as well in terms of library resources, get their own hall for eating, and like this close environment where you get to interact with a lot of people from other subjects. I found that really refreshing. Previously, I was at another university, as I said, that was much more subject focused. So you were usually hanging out with those who were from the same degree as you were, whereas at Oxford, it's a bit different, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think sometimes you do get small groups in econ, but econ is the more likely subject for you to be in a larger class for. But even then, we would occasionally go, wow, there are like 7 people in our class, as though that was a large number. Well, our friends at other unis would be quite happy if they were in a class of 50 or so. So I think, that's the disadvantage, if you think of it this way, is that you have nowhere to hide. If you want to just kind of coast through, you can do it at Oxford, but it's kind of tough. Just go somewhere else. But if you really want to get that smaller group attention, then I think it can be really great. Also, I mean, Oxford is a beautiful city. There are some pretty good extracurriculars you can do. I think actually a lot of what I learned from Oxford was not just the course, but all the things I did outside of studying, and all the people that I met, both in college, like Jan mentioned, but also outside. So if you can think of it, there's a good chance there's a society for it, and if there's not yet, you can go create one. One thing I liked is that a lot of people, maybe more commonly than some other settings I've been in, would be studying one subject but have like this specific niche area that was apparently unrelated that they were also really keen on. So you'd have someone who was studying engineering and was also really interested in psychology or music technology or like European law, which was just always quite fun because these things would pop up at random and you'd get these big bits of enthusiasm that you didn't necessarily expect. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think one thing that Oxford and Cambridge at that, although obviously Cambridge to a worse degree because it's Cambridge and we're in Oxford. One thing that Oxford and Cambridge are really good at is music as well, from what I can see from other unis, because every college has their own chapel, which has a chapel choir. Most colleges have some sort of music society. With I think Hertford had like 3 different ensembles. Hertford was my undergraduate college. And almost every college we heard earlier has organ scholars for the chapel, obviously. So I think that's something for musically minded, gifted people. I think Oxford and Cambridge are are also really good places. I know other unis obviously also have music societies and choirs and everything, but I think there's a lot more on offer in Oxford due to the college chapels.
Yeah, I think that's true. And as someone who's musically minded, although dubiously musically gifted, pre-COVID at least, I had quite a bit of fun getting involved. What I also liked was that while there's the university orchestra and so on, that is a very high standard. If you want to keep going with music, but you maybe don't want to put in the time commitment to do university-wide orchestra, or maybe you know, at an earlier stage in your musical career and you wouldn't really get in, you can still do like interesting and quite high level music stuff. So there are lots of opportunities in terms of the level of ability and time commitment you want to put in, as well as just sort of which college you're at or whatever. And also other colleges will often let you join their societies if you want to. Yeah, so loads of opportunities, provided there's not a global pandemic going on.
Same goes for rowing, by the way. If you're interested in rowing, I think Oxford and Cambridge are also very good places because there are just so many of them.
Yeah, my understanding is that the training you can get for rowing, especially as a novice, is incredible. It's very hard work, but some people really like it. So yeah.
Great, guys. Thank you. Yeah. Also, yeah. So if you guys want to add anything else, well, then we can move to the Q&A with some of our listeners. Anything, if you want to add anything, well, then we can move on.
Maybe one point, I'm not entirely sure, and you should check up on this if you're watching this webinar. The TSA might be online or on paper. Last year, as far as I know, it was mostly online due to COVID. I don't know how they will do it this year or in the years coming. And obviously, if it will be, well, you should choose how you do your mock exam, the way the TSA will actually work. So if you will only have the paper on a screen, then you should also only do it on a screen while you're doing the TSA. Whereas if you will have a paper, an actual physical paper, then you should print it out, have it beside you, and do it, yeah, using that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Perfect. Yeah. So if any one of our listeners wants to ask any question, now's the time. You can write it on the chat, or you can put your camera on and ask it yourself, or if not, then I'm sure we've said plenty of things about the TSA exam, and it's been great. Yeah. Okay. I think it's
maybe one little thing. There are some other entrance exams as well for other studies, or for postgraduate studies, for example, the GRE. Sometimes they are similar enough. I know for the GRE, because I had to do it, that some of the tips that you can find online for GRE practice also apply to the TSA. So have a browse. Don't buy books. That's at least not for the other exams. That's totally useless. But there's some really good, useful advice on the GRE and some other exams that also apply to the TSA for free on the web. So just have a look.
Yes, good point. And just to add to that, something that I found when I was a little bit when I was preparing for the TSA myself, and a bit more when I was writing the Inside Uni guide for the TSA, which you should check out. It's free, and I'm biased, but I think it's quite good. InsideUni.org, you'll find it. There are some very similar questions in some other undergrad admissions exams too. So the section 1 of the BMAT, the biomedical admissions test, is very similar to the first part of the TSA. Then probably the closest, Cambridge's economics admissions assessment has some problem solving questions. And the IMAT, general knowledge and logical reasoning question, well, the logical reasoning type stuff from that is quite similar too. So if you have done all the past papers and still want to spend time doing them because you just love these questions, that's where you can go. But I would also say it's probably not necessary, in the sense that it probably won't increase your score by a huge amount once you've already done the past papers. But it's there if you want it, and probably much better than buying a book of extra TSA questions. I did that once, and the particular book I had, a lot of the questions had typos in and weren't very good, and just yeah, that in my experience, don't sue me, whoever wrote this book.
Yeah, also adding to that, we also have a lot of links and tips for applying to university and everything, and within Project Access and Access Academy. So also check that out. And yeah, if you guys have anything else to add on the TSA or anything else, now's the time.
Sandika, have anything more to add? Yeah, just check out the Project Access stuff and Inside Uni as well. So if you get to the interview stage, you can find a bunch of things on how to, well, really just on people's interview experiences. So you have a bit more of an idea of what you might expect. We also have like subject guides and course pages. It's all student written and goes through like a pretty rigorous editing process that was made in consultation with Cambridge actually, and it's all out there for free. So yeah, check that out too.
Maybe for the foreign speakers of English, myself included, you might struggle, as I said, with the critical thinking. I just remembered there are, if you do have a problem that you tend to be a bit slower, which is natural because it's not your native language, and you will be much quicker in your native language. Try to work on that as well. What helped me was reading English books and look at that they have high-level prose. So ideally something scientific for a general audience, for example, is helped me really well. But you can look up whatever you're interested in and has a good prose. Does just as fine. The thing is just that you should put a bit practice into it if you are struggling with that.
That makes sense. I feel sorry for anyone having to take it in a second language, but if you do, you will, you probably got the advantage of speaking one more language to fluency than I can, so congratulations.
Perfect, guys. Thank you so much. It's been great. I'm sure everyone's gonna really appreciate all these tips on the TSA. And yeah, thank you so much for joining the webinar today. And thank you to everyone watching, wherever you are, whenever you're watching. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Peter. It was great.
It was a pleasure.
A pleasure. Thanks for organizing, and yeah, thanks for watching.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. See you.
Yeah.
Bye.